She moved through the military compound every morning before most officers finished their coffee, dressed in plain staff uniform with no rank on her shoulders and no name stitched on her chest, pushing a small cart of files and supplies, while conversations stopped and restarted around her as if she were part of the walls. Soldiers stepped past without greeting, junior officers spoke orders over her head, and senior men barely noticed her presence at all. To them, she was invisible, just another worker assigned to keep the place running, while real power walked by in polished boots. The corridors echoed with discipline and authority, yet she carried herself differently. Her steps were calm and measured, her back straight, her eyes alert without being curious. She observed everything without staring, every insignia, every pattern of movement, every shift change in security routine, and though no one paid attention to her face, there was something about the way guards unconsciously adjusted when she passed, as if their bodies recognized command, even when their minds did not. Once a young officer snapped at her to move faster, his tone sharp and careless. She simply nodded and stepped aside without apology. No fear in her eyes, no resentment either, just quiet control. Another staff member whispered that she should complain, but she shook her head gently, as if complaints were beneath her, as if time itself was on her side. By mid-morning, rumors spread about a high-level inspection. The general was arriving. Tension tightened the air. Uniforms were checked, voices lowered, mistakes suddenly mattered. Yet she continued her work unchanged, hands steady, expression unreadable, walking calmly toward the center of a storm no one realized she was meant to stand in, and no one yet understood that the most important person in the building was already there, long before the general arrived. The atmosphere shifted the moment the inspection order echoed through the compound. Voices sharpened, footsteps aligned, and every rank straightened under invisible pressure. Officers barked instructions while pretending not to feel nervous. And in the middle of that controlled chaos, she was still moving quietly between offices, carrying folders that suddenly seemed heavier because everyone else was afraid to make even the smallest mistake. When the general's convoy entered the base, the sound alone carried authority, engines humming like a warning. Soldiers snapped to attention, salutes rose in perfect timing, and eyes followed the polished boots as they touched the ground. Power arrived, dressed in medals and confidence, surrounded by aides who mirrored his stride and his certainty, and for a brief moment the entire facility felt smaller in his presence. As he moved through the corridors, he questioned officers sharply, pointing out flaws, demanding answers, testing loyalty and discipline. Then his gaze fell on her, standing slightly to the side, waiting patiently with documents in her hands, and without hesitation he addressed her as if she were part of the furniture, ordering her to move and fetch something. His voice loud enough for others to hear, a casual dismissal wrapped in authority. The room held its breath, expecting embarrassment, apology, submission, but she simply met his command with a calm nod, her expression steady, her posture unchanged, no rush in her movement, no sign of fear, and that stillness unsettled more than defiance ever could. A few senior officers exchanged quick glances, recognizing something strange in the way she responded. As if she were complying by choice rather than obligation, she handed the requested files back with quiet precision, her eyes briefly meeting the general's, not challenging, not lowered either, just level, controlled. And in that small moment, something invisible shifted, a subtle tension that crept into the room, unnoticed by most, but enough to make seasoned officers uneasy, because authority had been tested, and it had not landed where the general expected. The moment stretched longer than it should have, her hands steady as she passed the files forward, and as the general reached for them, his eyes finally settled on her face. Not in command but in recognition, delayed by disbelief. Something tightened in his expression. A pause so brief, yet so heavy, that the surrounding officers felt it, without understanding why. The rhythm of the inspection faltered, words died before leaving mouths. and the corridor seemed to narrow around that single exchange. His gaze sharpened, searching for confirmation, then dropped slightly to her posture. The way she stood balanced and unyielding, a stance drilled by years of command rather than routine labor. Memory stirred behind his eyes. A forgotten briefing room, a battlefield report, a face seen once under very different circumstances, and the color drained slowly from his features as a realization crept in. Sound faded as if the building itself held its breath. Aides stopped writing, guards froze mid-movement, and the general did not take the files immediately, his hand hovering, caught between authority and doubt, fear and respect. The confident energy he carried moments earlier fractured, replaced by something raw and human, something close to shock. She did nothing to fill the silence. No explanation, no signal. She simply waited, allowing recognition to complete its path on its own. Her eyes calm, unreadable, yet heavy with history, and in that quiet the balance of power began to tilt, unspoken but undeniably. Senior officer cleared his throat but stopped, unsure whether he was allowed to speak, because for the first time the general did not look like the highest rank in the room. He looked like a man confronted by a past he had hoped would remain buried, and every instinct around him sensed that whatever he was remembering had just walked back into his life, wearing the disguise of someone everyone else had. Ignored recognition settled fully into the general's face like a weight he could no longer deny. His shoulders stiffened, not with authority, but with restraint, and when he finally spoke her name, it came out quietly, stripped of rank and command, a name no one else in the room recognized yet. Every officer understood from his tone that it carried history and consequence. The air shifted as if an unspoken truth had been released. Murmurs rippled through the corridor before discipline crushed them back into silence. Aides stared at one another, unsure whether to record what was happening or pretend it was not. And she finally responded, her voice calm and controlled, correcting him gently when he used her former title, reminding him that she was no longer addressed that way. Not here, not now, her words revealing more by what they avoided than what they said. Fragments of the past surfaced through implication rather than explanation. A classified operation that never made the reports. A decision made under pressure that saved a campaign but sacrificed lives and reputations. Her reputation most of all. And the general's eyes reflected something between guilt and relief. Guilt for the order he gave years ago, relief that she was alive to stand before him. Officers began to piece it together. The way her presence unsettled security without breaking protocol. The way senior staff instinctively deferred without knowing why. She had once commanded respect at the highest level, and her disappearance had been explained away with sealed files and convenient silence. She did not accuse him. She did not demand recognition. Instead, she clarified why she was there now, not for revenge or restoration, but to observe, to ensure the mistakes of the past would not repeat themselves. And that quiet purpose carried more authority than any shouted command, leaving the general exposed before his own command structure, standing face to face with the cost of his decisions and the woman who carried them without ever needing to raise her voice. No formal announcement followed the revelation. No salute was called, no order was given to restore balance, because balance had already shifted, and everyone in the corridor felt it settling into a new shape. The general stood silent for a long moment, his authority intact on paper, yet hollowed by understanding, while she adjusted the files in her hands as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Then she spoke once more, not to remind him of who she had been, but to outline what would happen next. Her tone steady and professional, she informed him that the inspection would continue, that certain departments would be reviewed more closely, and that recommendations would be delivered without regard for rank. The words were simple, yet final, and the general nodded in agreement, without hesitation, a gesture that sent a quiet shock through every officer. Watching, she turned and walked away down the corridor, her steps unhurried, staff uniform unchanged, no escort following, and yet every soldier she passed straightened instinctively, eyes forward, posture sharp, recognition traveling faster than explanation ever could. Because command is not always announced, sometimes it is felt behind her. The general remained still, Yates waiting for instruction that did not come, and in that silence he confronted the truth that power built on titles could falter, while power built on discipline and consequence endured even in obscurity. The compound slowly returned to motion, but nothing felt the same. Conversations were quieter, orders more deliberate, and respect no longer reserved only for visible rank, because everyone had witnessed how easily authority could be misjudged, and how dangerous it was to overlook. Those who chose silence over recognition, by the end of the day, she blended back into routine, unseen once more, yet her presence lingered in the way decisions were weighed and voices softened, leaving behind a lesson carved deeper than any command ever could. That true authority does not demand attention, it commands it without asking.